I paid the mortgage on my parents' house for 5.5 years. 68 payments. $82,000 out of my own checking account. I found out they'd sold it from a Zillow alert on my phone while I was standing in a mechanical room in Fort Wayne. The house had closed 11 days earlier. Nobody called me. And when I finally got my mother on the phone that night, she said the sentence that ended 30 years of me being the reliable one. Honey, it was never your house, you were just helping. I'm 41. I'm a commercial HVAC estimator in Fort Wayne, Indiana. Been in the trade since I was 20, on the estimating side for the last 9 years, which means I spend my days pricing out rooftop units for schools and warehouses, and I am, professionally, a man who is very good at making numbers add up in a spreadsheet. Hold on to that. It's the only reason this story has an ending. I'm divorced, no kids. My ex-wife Christy and I split in 2019, and she has weirdly been one of the 2 people in my life who told me the truth about all this. I'll get to that. My dad is Ron. He's 71. He drove a delivery route for a beverage distributor for 26 years, and he has the back of a man who lifted kegs off a truck for 26 years, 2 fusions, chronic pain, and by 2018 he was done. My mother is Vicky. She's 68. She did billing for a chiropractor's office in New Haven, Indiana, part-time until about 2016, and I have a sister. Bree. She's 34, 7 years younger than me, and she's the reason I know exactly how much my parents' love costs, because I've been paying retail for it my whole life, while she got it. I want to be careful here because I know how this sounds. Bitter older brother, golden child sister. But I need you to have the actual data, so here's the ledger. When Bree turned 16 in 2007, my parents co-signed a used Corolla for her, $11,000. When I turned 16 in 2000, my dad drove me to a lot in Decatur and watched me hand over $1,900 I'd saved from a summer at a car wash for a Cavalier with 140,000 miles on it, and he said, and I remember this word for word because I was proud of it at the time, a man buys his own car. I was 16, Bree was 16, different rules, nobody in that family has ever once acknowledged that. Bree went to Ball State for 3 semesters on my parents' dime. She didn't finish. She's had, by my count, 11 jobs since 2012, and the way it always goes is that she's incredibly excited about the new thing for about 5 months. And then there's a manager who has it out for her. Meanwhile, I'm the one who put a new water heater in their house in 2015. I'm the one who redid their roof in 2016 with 2 guys from work on a Saturday, materials only, $1,800. I'm the one who came over every time the furnace cycled wrong, which is at least 14 times, because that furnace was a 1998 unit that should have been condemned. And every single time my mother would say, "You're such a good son." And every single time I'd feel about 11 years old and warm all the way through, and I want to be honest that I liked it. I liked being the good son. That's not a neutral fact in this story. That's the hook they had in me for 40 years, and I bit down on it happily. Okay. 2018. The kitchen table. My dad's back finally quit in the spring. He couldn't do stairs, and the house on Coventry Lane is a 2-story with the only full bathroom upstairs. So they found a rental, a 1-level duplex over by the hospital, $850 a month. The problem was the house. They had refinanced it in 2011 to pay off some things, and they still owed about $94,000 on it, and the payment was $1,206 a month, with taxes and insurance escrowed. My father's Social Security and pension came to a little over $2,600 a month. My mother had a small amount. They could cover the rental. They could not cover the rental and a mortgage. So we sat down at their kitchen table on Coventry Lane in June of 2018. Me, my mom, my dad, and Bree. My proposal was simple. I'd take over the mortgage payment. Not a loan to them, not a gift. I would pay it every month, and in exchange the house would come to me. My dad said, and I can still hear him say it, "That's fair, you're the one keeping it." My mother said, "Well, of course it goes to you, who else would it go to?" And Bree, who was sitting right there with a Diet Coke, said, "Yeah, obviously." Nobody wrote anything down. I want you to sit with that for a second, because this is the part of the story where every single person in the comments is going to say the same thing, and you'll be right. I'm a professional estimator. I write 40-page bid documents. I know what a contract is. and I sat at my parents' kitchen table and made an $82,000 handshake deal with my own family because asking them to sign something felt like an insult. I brought it up once, about 4 months in. I said something like, "Hey, should we get something in writing, just so it's clean if anything ever happens?" And my mother got this hurt look and said, "Marcus, we're not going to need a piece of paper to keep our word to our own son." I dropped it. I dropped it because the alternative was 3 days of her being quiet with me, and I was 34, and I still couldn't handle 3 days of her being quiet with me. Then, in August of 2018, 6 weeks after we made the deal, Bree moved into the house. She'd broken up with a guy in Muncie. It was supposed to be until she got on her feet. My mother called me and said, "It's better than it sitting empty, honey. Empty houses get vandalized." I said, "Is she paying anything?" And my mother said, "She's going to help with the utilities." Bree lived in that house rent-free for 5.5 years. She did not at any point help with the utilities, because they were in my parents' name and she just paid them, which my mother described to relatives as Bree taking care of the house. So the arrangement, from the outside, looked like this. I paid $1,206 a month for my sister to live somewhere for free, and everyone in my family understood this to be normal, and I said yes to it because saying no would have been a fight, and I have never in my life been good at that fight. Here are the 3 things I noticed and let go, and every one of them comes back. The first was in 2020. I stopped by the house on a Saturday to look at the furnace, and I noticed the mailbox at the end of the driveway had been changed. New post, new box. And when I asked Bree about it, she said the old one got hit by a plow. Fine, except the mail wasn't in it. There was nothing in it, ever, any time I stopped by, and one time in 2021 I asked her about a piece of mail I'd had sent there. A rebate check from a supplier, and she said, "Oh, I forward everything to Mom and Dad's, it's easier." She was forwarding my parents' mail off the property. In 2020, the second thing was at Christmas 2022. My Aunt Deb, my mom's sister, hugged me and said, "You know, you don't have to keep doing all that for them," and I laughed and said it's fine, and Deb said, "Vicky says you insist. She says they've told you 100 times to stop." I said, "They've never told me to stop." And Deb made a face like she'd stepped in something and said, "Well, you know your mother." That's the first time I heard the story they were telling. Not that I was helping. That I was insisting, over their objections, like a nuisance. That framing is the whole ballgame, and I didn't understand it for another 2 years. The third thing was my dad. In the fall of 2023, my father started slipping. Not dramatically. He'd tell the same story twice in an hour. He called me Ronnie once, which is his own name. And at Thanksgiving that year, he asked me, out of nowhere, in the middle of dinner, "Are we caught up on the house?" And my mother said, immediately, "Ron, we're fine, eat your potatoes." He looked confused and went back to eating. I remember that moment because I remember thinking, he's worried about the mortgage, that's sad, he doesn't need to worry. He's got me. In February of 2024, he was diagnosed with vascular dementia. Early stage. He was still himself most days. He still knew me. But there were gaps, and the gaps were getting wider, and my mother started handling everything, which made sense. Now, the alert. I need to explain the Zillow thing because people always ask. In 2018, right when all this started, I set up a saved search and an alert on the address 44112 Coventry Lane because I was curious what the house was worth relative to what I was putting into it. That's the whole reason. I'm an estimator. I like knowing the number. I got a price change email maybe twice a year for 6 years, and I stopped reading them somewhere around 2020. Thursday, March 14th of this year, at 11:40 in the morning. I was on a walkthrough at a school in Huntington, standing in a mechanical room with the district's maintenance guy, and my phone buzzed. "A home you're following has sold. 4412 Coventry Lane, Fort Wayne, IN. Sold for $241,000. Under it, the date. It had closed on the 29th of February, 11 days. It had been closed for 11 days and not one person in my family had said one word to me. I want to tell you what I did in that mechanical room, and the answer is nothing. I put my phone in my pocket and I finished the walkthrough. I measured a chase. I asked about the gas line. I said thank you to the maintenance guy and I shook his hand. And then I sat in my truck in that parking lot for about 20 minutes and did not move. Then I called my mother. She picked up on the fourth ring and she was cheerful. I said, "Mom, did you sell the house?" And there was this pause, maybe 2 seconds. And then she said, "Oh, honey, I thought Bree told you." I said, "Bree didn't tell me anything." And my mother said, "Well, don't make it into a thing. Your father needed to have that off his plate." I said, "Mom, I've paid that mortgage for 5.5 years. That's $82,000. We agreed it was coming to me, and my mother said it. Honey, it was never your house. You were just helping." I said, "That's not what we agreed to." And she said, "You offered. Nobody ever asked you for a dime, Marcus. You offered and now you want to hold it over us?" I hung up. I have never hung up on my mother in my life. I hung up on her in a parking lot in Huntington, Indiana, and then I drove back to the shop and finished my day because I did not know what else a person does. That night I did the only thing I actually know how to do, which is open a spreadsheet. I pulled every statement. 68 payments. $1,206 a month, every month from October 2018 through the last one I made in February of this year, which cleared on the 5th, which was 24 days before they closed on a house I was still paying for. 82,008 killed me. $82,008 exactly. I'd never added it up before. Not once in 5.5 years. I put every confirmation number in a column and every date, and I sat at my kitchen table until 1:30 in the morning looking at a number that was more than half of what I'd paid on my own house. And then I thought about the roof, and the water heater, and the 14 furnace calls. And I thought about a 16-year-old kid handing over $1,900 for a Cavalier while his father said a man buys his own car. That's the moment, not the phone call. The spreadsheet Easter was 5 days later at Bree's new place, which is a rental in Aboit that she'd apparently moved into in January, which nobody had told me either. I want to be honest that I went there to make a scene. I've thought about it a lot and I'm not going to dress it up. I printed all 68 confirmations, one per page, and I put a rubber band around them, and I brought them in a manila envelope, and I sat through ham and green bean casserole with that envelope on the floor by my chair. There were 11 people there. My parents, Bree and her boyfriend Tyler, Aunt Deb and her husband, 2 cousins, and my cousin Shannon's 2 kids. I waited until the plates were cleared. Then I got the envelope and I pulled off the rubber band, and I set that stack down on the coffee table in front of my mother, and the whole room went quiet the way rooms do. I said, "That's 68 mortgage payments. That's $82,008. Tell me again which part of it was a gift." And my mother did not blink. She looked at that stack, and then she looked at Aunt Deb, not at me, at Deb, because she was playing to the room, and she said, "See, this is what I've been telling you. He's been keeping score on his own parents." My Aunt Deb looked at the carpet, and my dad, who was having an okay day, who was in the recliner with a plate on the arm, said, "What's he saying about the house?" And my mother said, "Nothing, Ron. Nobody's saying anything about the house." And Bree, my little sister, standing in the doorway to the kitchen with a dish towel, said the line that I actually think about more than anything my mother said. She said, "Marcus, you make 90 grand a year. You'll be fine." I picked up my keys and I left. Aunt Deb followed me out to the driveway and said my name twice, and I didn't stop. And I want to apologize to her for that specifically. Because as it turns out, Deb was about to become the most important person in this entire story. A lot of you would have gone straight to a lawyer that Monday. I didn't, and I want to explain why, because I think it's the most common thing in the world and nobody talks about it. I didn't go to a lawyer because I was ashamed, not of them. Of me. Because in order to explain the situation to a professional, I was going to have to say out loud, to a stranger, that I gave my family $82,000 over 5.5 years without a single piece of paper. That's the sentence I couldn't get out of my mouth. Every time I imagined saying it, I imagined the guy's face. So instead I did nothing for 11 days and I watched the family process me. The group chat started Easter night. 19 people in it, my mother's side. My cousin Shannon posted a family photo from the day with a caption about being grateful, and then somebody said something about a rough afternoon, and then it went private and I got the fragments secondhand. What I got directly was this. Bree texted me at 11:15 that night. That was unbelievably cruel. Dad was confused for an hour after you left. You want to be the martyr, fine, but do it away from him. My cousin Shannon, who I've always liked, sent a long one about how everyone was hurting and Grandma and Grandpa aren't going to be around forever and money isn't worth this. And my mother sent nothing for 6 days. Then, on the Friday, she sent one message that I've read probably 100 times. I raised you to be generous, and I'm sorry that's turned into something you resent. That house was ours to sell. When you're ready to apologize to your sister, we'd like to see you. Apologize to my sister. The version circulating by the second week was fully baked. Marcus had insisted on paying over their objections for years. Marcus had never been asked. Marcus was now demanding to be paid back for what he'd always called a gift, and he'd done it at Easter, in front of children, while his father with dementia sat 8 feet away. Every single piece of that is true if you delete 2 things. The conversation at the kitchen table in 2018, and the fact that Bree lived there free for 5.5 years. And I had no proof of the kitchen table conversation. That's what was eating me alive. I had proof of every dollar and no proof of the promise, and a promise about real estate that isn't in writing is, in Indiana, worth roughly what the air it was spoken into is worth. I knew that much from Google at 2 in the morning. Then, on the 11th day, Aunt Deb called me. She said, "I need you to come over, not on the phone." I sat in her kitchen and she put a mug in front of me and she said, "First, nobody ever told you to stop paying that mortgage, did they?" I said no. And Deb said, "I know. I've known for about 2 years and I've been a coward about it." Then she told me what she'd overheard in 2022 in that same kitchen when my mother had had 2 glasses of wine at Deb's birthday. My mother had said, and Deb repeated it to me with her hands flat on the table, "Marcus doesn't need it. Bree's the one who's going to need something when we're gone." Deb said, "I told her that wasn't right." And she said, and I'm quoting her, "He'll understand. He'll understand." 2 years before they sold it, and then Deb said the thing that turned this whole story sideways. She said, "Marcus, did your dad know?" I said, "What do you mean?" She said, "I saw Ron 3 weeks after the closing at the Kroger with your mother, and he asked me if I'd heard anything about somebody buying the house. He didn't say we sold the house. He said somebody buying the house. Like he'd heard a rumor." I said, "Deb, he's got dementia. He forgets things," and my aunt said, "Honey, he wasn't confused. He was asking." I have rewritten this next part in my head about 200 times, and there's no version where I come out of it feeling good, so I'm just going to lay it out the way it happened. The next morning I did the thing I should have done on day 1, which took me 90 minutes and cost $42. In Indiana, deeds are public record. Every county recorder has an online search. I pulled up the Allen County Recorder's site, typed in the address, and got every instrument recorded against 4412 Coventry Lane, going back to when my parents bought it in 1994. There were 3 documents I'd never seen. The first was the warranty deed for the sale. Recorded March 4th. Grantors, Ronald and Victoria. Buyer's name I won't put here. $241,000. The second was a mortgage payoff release from the bank. $91,000 and change gone, satisfied at closing my mortgage. The one I'd paid 68 times. And the third was a durable power of attorney, recorded on the 18th of January of this year. Ronald, principal. Attorney in fact. Brianna, not my mother, my sister. 6 weeks before the closing, I ordered certified copies of everything, including the recorded power of attorney, and I sat in my truck outside the city-county building and looked at my father's signature on that document. I've known my dad's signature my whole life. He signed my report cards. He signed the title on that Cavalier. Ron's signature has a big looping capital R, and then the rest of it degrades into a flat line. It's fast. It's a route driver's signature, a man who signed 400 delivery tickets a week for 26 years. The signature on that power of attorney was slow. You can see it. The letters are separate and shaky, and they're pressed hard enough into the paper that you can see it in a scan. It's a man's hand being guided, or a man's hand that no longer works, or both, and then I looked at the date. January 18th, and something went off in my head, because January 18th meant something to me, and it took a minute to place it. I opened my phone and went to my texts with my mother, and scrolled back, and there it was, January 17th from her. Dad's having his cataract done tomorrow at 7 a.m. They said 3 hours all in. I'll call you when he's out. His right eye. Cataract surgery. He was in a surgical center on DuPont Road on the morning of January 18th, sedated, and by that afternoon he was home with a shield taped over his eye and orders not to bend over or lift anything and, obviously, not able to see out of one side of his face. That's the day my father allegedly read and executed a durable power of attorney giving my 34-year-old sister authority over his affairs. I called Deb. She confirmed the cataract date immediately because she'd brought them a casserole that night. She said, "Marcus, he was on that couch with the shield on and he was loopy. I was there at 6 in the evening. The notary's name was on the document, a woman who works at a title company in Fort Wayne. And here's the part that made my hands go cold. The notarization says it was executed at 3:15 in the afternoon. So then I did the last piece, and it's the piece that broke it open. I went back to the recorder and pulled the closing documents that had been recorded, and then I did something that took me 3 days and a very polite phone call. I contacted the title company that handled the sale, identified myself as the son of the sellers, and asked, as a matter of public record, who signed the deed at closing. They wouldn't tell me anything over the phone. But my lawyer got it in 9 days, and I'm getting ahead of myself. The deed was signed by Victoria in her own name, and by Brianna as attorney-in-fact for Ronald. My father never signed the sale of his own house. My mother sold that house, with my sister holding a power of attorney executed the afternoon of his cataract surgery, and the reason they needed the power of attorney at all is that a title company will not close on a property when one of the sellers can't be reliably attested to have capacity. They didn't get the power of attorney because my father couldn't hold a pen. They got it because he was saying no. I found that out 3 weeks later from the last person on earth I expected, and I'll get there. But that afternoon, sitting in my truck with certified copies on the passenger seat, I understood that I had spent 11 days building a case against my parents and that one of my parents was not on the other side of it. Okay, here's how it all landed. I'll go in order. I hired a lawyer on the 22nd of April. Her name is Andrea Kilborn. She does estate and elder law in Fort Wayne, and the consultation was $400, and I said the sentence I'd been dreading. I gave my family $82,000 with nothing in writing, and she did not make a face. She said, "Okay, show me the bank records." She told me 2 things in the first 15 minutes. 1, my claim on the house itself was weak to non-existent. Verbal agreements about real property don't survive in Indiana. She was blunt. You are not getting that house back. 2, I was not, legally speaking, a disappointed son. I was an unpaid creditor. 68 documented payments from my account, satisfying an obligation that belonged to somebody else, with no gift letter and no documentation of donative intent, is a claim for unjust enrichment. She said, they received a benefit. They knew they were receiving it. They sold the asset and kept the proceeds. That's a lawsuit, and it's a boring one, which is the best kind. And then I put the power of attorney on her desk and the January 17th text about the cataract surgery, and she stopped taking notes. She said, "This is a different case." Andrea filed 2 things in May. A civil complaint for unjust enrichment against my mother, seeking $82,008, and a petition in probate court to void the power of attorney and appoint a guardian ad litem for my father, on the grounds that the instrument was executed while he was recovering from a sedated surgical procedure, and that the attorney in fact had used it in a transaction in which she was a direct financial beneficiary. That second one is the one that mattered, and I want to be clear that I did not file it to win money. I filed it because a guardian ad litem is a person the court appoints who works for my father and nobody else, and who has subpoena power. The family reaction was nuclear. I got a voicemail from my mother that I saved and that I am never going to play for anyone. Shannon blocked me. Somebody, and I genuinely don't know who, told my employer's HR line that I was under investigation for elder financial abuse, which went nowhere in about a day but which I will not forget. And then on the 3rd of July, Tyler called me. Tyler is Bree's boyfriend. 36 years old, works at a machine shop, and I had exchanged maybe 40 sentences with him across 4 years. He said, "I need to tell you something, and then I'm probably going to lose my girlfriend." He'd been in the house on Coventry Lane in early January, helping Bree pack her stuff for the move to Aboit, and my parents were there. And he was in the garage, and he heard my mother and Bree in the kitchen with my father, and he heard my father say, clearly, more than once. I told Marcus. I told him it was his, and he heard my mother say, Ron, he doesn't need it. And he heard my father say, I gave him my word. Tyler said he stood in that garage with a box of dishes in his hands for about 5 minutes. Then he said, 2 weeks later, Bree told me she had to go be at your dad's eye appointment for some paperwork thing. I didn't put it together until you filed. He gave a statement to the Guardian ad litem in August. Here's what came out of that investigation, and it took until October. The notary had no independent recollection, but her journal showed the signing took place at my parents' house at 3:15 in the afternoon. And she recorded that the principal appeared to understand, and she also recorded in the journal that the principal was wearing an eye shield, because notaries write down things like that. The Guardian ad litem's report to the court found that the power of attorney was executed under circumstances that could not establish informed consent, that the attorney in fact had a direct conflict of interest in the transaction, and, this is the sentence that ended it, that the principal had, on at least 3 documented occasions with his primary care physician in 2023 and 2024, stated that his house was going to his son 3 occasions. In his medical chart, because my father, who was losing his memory and knew it, had been telling his doctor, he wrote it down where he knew it would keep. The power of attorney was voided in November. That doesn't undo the sale. The buyer's a stranger who did nothing wrong and their title is fine. But voiding it meant the proceeds became my father's marital property handled without authority. And it meant my sister was exposed as having exercised an invalid instrument for her own benefit. The civil case settled in January. Mediation, 4 hours, in a conference room where my mother did not look at me once. I got $78,000. Not the full $82,008, because that's not how settlements work, and because Andrea's fee came out of it. And I want people to understand that I walked away from this with about $51,000 after everything. 5.5 years and 1 family later. The remainder of the sale proceeds, about $130,000, went into a court-supervised account for my father's care with a professional fiduciary, not my mother and not Bree. Neither of them can touch it. It pays for the memory care facility he moved into in December, which costs $6,200 a month and which he needed and which my mother had been resisting because it would eat the money. That's the part I hold on to, not the settlement. That Bree was not charged with anything. The prosecutor's office looked at it for about 6 weeks and declined, which Andrea told me from the start was likely, because these cases are hard and because my father can no longer testify about what he understood in January. She's radioactive now in a way that will follow her. The Guardian ad litem's report is a public court filing. But she's not going to jail and I've had to make my peace with that. Tyler and Bree broke up in September. He texted me at Christmas. Just, hope your dad's doing all right. I said he's all right. He is, mostly. My mother and I do not speak. She's in the duplex still. She has told everyone who will listen that her son sued her and put her husband in a home. Both of those things are technically true, and that is her entire gift, that she can tell you a true thing that is a total lie. Aunt Deb and I have dinner every other Sunday. She apologized for the 2 years she sat on what she heard in her own kitchen, and I told her the truth, which is that she's the reason any of it came apart. And that a person who is a coward for 2 years and then isn't is worth more to me than 11 people who never stopped being one. And my dad. I see him on Tuesdays and Saturdays. The facility is out on Illinois Road. He knows me about 70% of the time. On the good days we watch whatever's on, and he tells me the same story about a delivery route in 1988, and I let him tell it every time. Because that story is his, and it's still all the way in there. In February, on a Saturday out of absolutely nowhere, he looked at me and said, "Did we get that squared away, the house?" And I said, "Yes, Dad, we got it squared away." And he said, "Good. I told your mother." And then he watched television for a while, and then he asked me if I'd eaten. I have a copy of 1 page of his medical chart in the folder in my closet. It's from an appointment on the 9th of May, 2023, 10 months before any of this. In the middle of a paragraph about his blood pressure, there's a note where the physician wrote down what the patient said. It says he expressed concern about making sure the house goes to his son as promised. As promised. $82,000, 5.5 years, a family, and the only person who ever put it in writing was a man who was losing his mind and knew he had to leave a record somewhere. So here's what I need to ask. Because my cousin Shannon still tells people I destroyed this family over money, and Aunt Deb and I go around on the second one every couple weeks. Was I wrong to file the guardianship petition? The thing that ultimately put my father in memory care and took the money out of my mother's hands. When part of my reason for filing it was that I wanted to win. And the harder one, my aunt heard my mother say, "He'll understand," 2 years before they sold it, and sat on it. Is she really any less responsible than my mother? Or does coming forward at the end actually count for something?